series. We're here with Ortrude Dial at Three Sisters Farm here in Williams, Iowa, and central Iowa. And we're excited. She's going to share her experiences as a first generation woman farmer and how she uses sheep on this landscape. So I'm excited to pass this over to her. But before we do that, I want to let viewers know you can share comments and questions in the chat box, and I will be watching those so I can share those with Ortrude as we're going through the this live event. I also want to thank Premier One for being a sponsor of this field day. They offer a lot of great supplies for grazing livestock. So I will turn it over to you, Ortrude, if you want to share with our YouTube viewers a little bit about you and tell us about your farm.
So, barely 20 years ago, I knew nothing about sheep and even less about farming because I'm not from a farm background. I didn't grow up on a farm. My parents are not farmers. They are immigrants from Germany. They came here to this country with three little kids and or young kids and not much else. Um, so they started from scratch, and I think that's why I was maybe I had it in me to be able to start from scratch because I am just a beginning farmer less than 20 years ago, I guess, and starting from scratch. But I did major in animal science, so I guess I can say that I'm doing what I majored in. And I worked in research labs for many years. Um, and then one day I was asked to, in an emergency situation, manage a large hog confinement farm. And I don't know, I can't remember the guy who quit or was fired. So that's how I got my feet wet in livestock production. And I, uh, we left Ames and other universities. We moved to an acreage. We were involved in corporate agriculture, factory farming full time. Uh, so we quickly realized this is not the way to raise livestock. And so we started a business managing pig production in a welfare friendly way and developed the markets for that. Um, but meanwhile, uh, it was up to me to manage our growing acres that we were purchasing. And I needed training. I needed, to learn so much. So what I did was I just asked, neighbors because being a woman, I had to work twice as hard to convince people that I wasn't just another city slicker looking for a rural fantasy, a pastoral, wonderland. I was serious, and I would talk to seed dealers, bankers, implement dealers, university staff, USDA employees, you know, farmers on YouTube everywhere. I went to conferences. I read a lot. Um, worked hard learning. But I had one other challenge that I didn't expect, other than being a woman, was I was an outsider, and I didn't have roots there in that small community. I didn't have generations under my belt. Uh, so I had to earn the trust of this close knit community and get thick skin about their suspicion about me. But when I did, the neighborly help was overwhelming. So that's a quick overview of my beginning in livestock production. And so the next thing I want to talk about is sheep production. Uh, so we had all these acres that we accumulated that were marginal, rough, overgrown, inaccessible, fragile, perfect for sheep grazing, right? So I had a neighbor who had a few sheep, and I started hanging around there and offering to bottle feed, help out, whatever. And finally, he said to me, "Look, I'm really busy. I've got these 25 sheep here that are a group that are going to lamb right in the middle of harvest. So I'll tell you what, I'll haul these sheep over to your farm, put them in your barn, and you can take care of them. And then after they lamb and after harvest is over, I'll come pick them up." Sounded good, right? Well, those 25 sheep never left my farm. And that's how I got my start. And I grew the flock from there. I have roughly 400 ewes. I have a closed flock, which means I keep all my replacement ewes and I only purchase rams. The sheep that we have are polypay, which is a synthetic breed. They're a maternal type sheep. They're really good mothers. They have good milk, a lot of lambs. They're very prolific. But a year ago, before breeding season, I decided to transition the flock to a hair breed. And I decided to go with Dorper because they also have really good characteristics, good maternal, good meat quality, can grow on minimal grain, hardy. So the reason why I did that was the last few years wool prices have been terrible, and the shearing costs keep going up, and it's just a lot of work to shear that many sheep. And I'm all about reducing the labor. And we were already trying to do things like not have to castrate, and this way with hair sheep you don't even have to dock their tails, dam their tails, or of course obviously shear. So so that's my reasoning there. And I have to look at my notes every once in a while. So uh, production wise, sheep are in a barn that we use for lambing and gestation that is a converted turkey building. And then we also have a pole shed that is like where we keep all our family groups. But with that many sheep, you have to flow them through the facilities. And so we have them in 3 groups. The first group lambs January, February. The second group February, March, with kind of a transition there, like a wave. And then the third group, which are the ewe lambs, lamb in April. And by that time, they're about a year old. So we purposely keep them last for lambing. And we feed mostly our own grain, our own corn that we grow. And I do purchase a pelleted supplement that we mix with the corn, and then also a creep feed for the starting lambs. We feed our own hay, which we also harvest and bale. And I have oats, so we have a lot of straw, and that's what we use for bedding. So I would say that my goals with sheep production are 3. Number 1, it gives us winter work and also a certain lifestyle. And number 2, I want the sheep to pay for all of our farm labor. And number 3, I want the sheep to be full circle feed to fertilizer. So I expect the sheep to be fed by the farm and in return feed the farm. So we use, all their fertilizer on our crop ground and on our hay fields. So that's our sheep production. And the next thing I needed to learn about was
we go there, can you talk a little bit about your labor? Because you talked about having hired help.
Yes, I have one full-time hired hand, and I also have my daughter who works on the farm. So I have basically two people that are hired help and myself. So so the sheep pay for that,
Nice.
and the work in the wintertime justifies having hired help because then when we're busy in the summer, I have that. So
Yeah, you can spread that around.
right, right. So yeah, with fencing, I had to learn also by making some mistakes, and so I'll share with you the mistakes I made, and also what I think we, have ended up doing that works for us. Mistake number one was high tensile fence, and we found out that it does not work for sheep, especially woolly ones. They seem to just roll right through it. You have to maintain it. You have to keep the vegetation cleared away because you've got electrical strands. And then, we thought we were brilliant because we buried wire under places where there was a gate. But then if there was a short somewhere, it was a headache, a nightmare trying to figure out where that short was because a lot of your line was buried underground. So, yeah, that old adage about good fences make good neighbors has a lot of truth to it because, um, yeah, I tell you what, I hate getting those phone calls at a bad time when the sheep are out. And luckily, sheep are easy to herd back in. They always remember where they got out. So if you start pushing them, they'll find and show you where they got out so you can fix it. So the new fence that we put in now is a woven wire with one single strand of barbed wire across the top. And it's the kind of fence that has small squares. And the problem with that is sheep will still try to stick their head through, and if they do, more than likely they get stuck. I mean, not all the time, but more often. That's the only disadvantage. But otherwise, it's completely maintenance free once you put in a good fence like that. So we really do that. While we're here, I want to show you this fence because we got a really good deal on it. It's called a high tensile woven wire, and it's a little higher. I like the fence I use at home. I think is like 42 inches. And this is higher. It used to have an electrical strand across the top that we abandoned, but it has big squares that the sheep can stick their heads through and eat vegetation on the other side of the fence. So it helps maintain. And this fence, even though it's not very good quality, it's over 16 years old. This is the first fence we put in, and it's still pretty good. And yeah, the sheep don't get their heads stuck, but there is still a dumb sheep who will put its head through and try to come out through the other side. And so they get really tangled in there, and sometimes it can be fatal if you don't catch that right away. So it's always a good idea to check your fences, but that's easier said than done. We have miles of perimeter fence, and you really have to be on horseback to check it. My fantasy is get up in the morning, saddle up a horse, ride the fence line before breakfast. But yeah, back to reality.
Yes, very bucolic of you.
Yeah. So yeah, that's probably it about fences.
Yeah. Well, can you tell us a little bit about how because you talked about this ground being very overgrazed when you took possession of it, and how did you use the sheep to manage it to this beautiful landscape you've created?
Well, the sheep didn't do it all, but they're keeping it this way.
Mhm.
So the way this pasture looked in the beginning was, well, where the pond is, that was just a gully full of farm junk. Um, every farm we have has 2 or 3 of these family dumps. I mean, it was full of old cars. It was full of rolls of wire, feeders, toys, bottles, millions of jars. Um, so all of that now is buried under that pond, except
Mhm.
we did recycle a lot of it
Nice.
as much as we could. But yeah, all those glass jars. Every once in a while, a bottle surfaces.
I'm sure.
And the open pasture areas were just covered with that honey locust tree, which has a thorn about this long, and it can pop any tire. So we had to get a small bulldozer and a skid loader with tracks, and little by little we uh, took down those trees and piled them up and burned them everywhere. And then all of a sudden, forage started growing. I mean, we didn't
Mhm.
have to reseed. I mean, there were cows that grazed this before we had it, but I honestly don't know how those cows could even go through those trees. They were so thick.
Mhm.
I don't think a cow could penetrate them. And of course, nothing grew there. And when the trees got taken away, the ancient grasses and things just were able to flourish again. And the sheep, we have about 80 acres on this section. It's divided in 3 paddocks. We graze 150 sheep on it. And we have a hayfield over there that we uh, bale 1 or 2 cuttings, depends, and then we'll let it kind of grow and stockpile, and then it has perimeter fence, so we can let the sheep graze that in the fall if we need to.
Nice.
Um, so the only noxious thing that we have to work on controlling are the thistles, and no matter how hard you try to rotate and move animals and let pasture rest, they have a favorite spot where they like to rest and sleep, and they tend to get overgrazed in that spot, and um, then the thistles come out. So we do come out in those spots. We have to control that. So yeah, it was big gullies where the ponds were, and junk and thorn trees.
Yeah,
So
I think that's such an important thing that the sheep help maintain that, and that all that work of removing those, the sheep can help
right,
keep them from coming back in that.
and they don't
thick.
come back that I can see. I mean, we have some spots that we missed, or fenced off in that pond area over there where they're starting to come back.
Yeah.
But yeah, all this, yeah, they keep it. Even the multiflora rose, they kind of keep that at bay as well.
Wonderful.
They nibble on that.
Well, should we head towards this pond and you can tell us a little bit how that got established?
Yep.
And now this is one of how many ponds you have on the property?
3.
3. Okay. You just see so much wildlife. While you were talking, you watched a crane fly away from the pond.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about that too. So, this pond is kind of a favorite one. I got a lot of people that like to fish here, so you can see some stuff that other people have put there. I'll talk about equip now.
Yeah.
So So we learned about and used a USDA program called EQIP, and that stands for Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And the EQIP program we used was livestock water quality, livestock watering and water quality. And it covered 90% of the cost share for these ponds, these two, because they are tied in with the waterways that we had to put in our field. So the water is surface drained and filtered before it goes into the pond. And then the pond right here that's a natural waterway right here. So it can overflow. It's designed that way.
Nice.
There's also an overflow pipe. And then there's also a pipe near the bottom that leads to that hydrant down there.
Okay.
So Jason, if you want to show them that, we can put a stock tank there and fill it with water from the pond. So if you, for some reason, don't want your livestock in the pond and we fence them out like we did for a while because we were planting trees in there that didn't grow, now we let the sheep go in there and keep down the vegetation. But yeah, the river through here almost always dries up by the end of the summer. It's not a good flowing water source. So here we have stockpiled water and we can always water our livestock. And we stocked it with fish and the fish are thriving. And I think it's because of the way we farm. And I can say that because we built a third pond on the other side of the river, which we only got 50% cost share for because it's tied in with the neighbor's drain field. And they don't have waterways, but they have tile. So the tile would empty into that gully that used to be the pond. And they also use GMO crops, and they don't really use conservation tillage because where our fence meets their property, it drops off 6 feet or more. And can you imagine losing 6 feet of topsoil? Sometimes I wonder if that farmer thinks about that when he drives by his tractor and has to look up at the fence line.
Yeah.
But anyway, the fish we put in that pond didn't survive. And it's always kind of murky and overgrown with algae. And that's because of the type of water that's flowing in there and the farming practices that are used on that drain field. Whereas these ponds, I mean, there's a little bit of algae, but mostly they're full and the fish are thriving. So I guess I wanted to talk about wildlife too. I guess over the years I've noticed a change in the wildlife and the habitat. Besides thriving fish and oodles of deer and pheasants and a real healthy bunch of coyotes. We have spotted jackrabbits, and there's a lot of badgers here too. We've seen, and a big population of bobolinks. And I know where they nest over that hay field, and I always try to time my hay harvest until after they hatched out and kind of run away. And so I noticed that there's just more of them. And walking around over there, you used to just catch a glimpse of them, but now you just see oodles of them out there. And also I've seen honeybees. We found hives, and there are so many bumblebees and bats. I like to think that we don't have an insect problem with our crops because there's so many bats here. So that's what I've noticed. But I guess I could say that maybe the wildlife was always here. And I'd like to think that what we're doing helps them thrive and continue to thrive.
Yeah.
So, at first I thought seeing a jackrabbit was a fluke, but we see one or two every year.
How exciting.
Yeah. Also, water quality is a big concern for me. on the farm where I live. It's the beginning of the Skunk River, and there's a spot where the property ends, and then the river becomes a dredge ditch. It's straightened years ago, and because of that, there's all these giant culverts and tile lines that poke into it. And when there's a rainy spring, that river just overflows its banks. And every year I see where it makes a curve, the pasture is just falling into the river and it's eroding away. And we've tried putting concrete chunks and things like that in vulnerable areas, but it's an unwinnable battle. I think the solution is like planting trees and a riparian buffer. So yeah, so that we're trying to preserve the oxbows there too, and another equip program I want to mention that helped us out was a tree planting program, and we weren't successful planting trees here around these ponds for some reason, but that pond over there, the bad one, there's 50 to 100 oak trees and shagbark hickories. So I think maybe years from now that will be a oak savanna, right?
How exciting.
And so I guess in conclusion, right? No, are we?
A little bit there, but before we go, do you mind talking a little bit about how you market your sheep? Because you raise them out here, but what comes after that?
Yeah, the lambs, it worked out best for us to sell them as lightweight lambs, so in that 60-pound range. And then that way we can, like I say, use our facilities to the max and get sheep moved out. And so we start selling them at that weight, and they go to ethnic markets. And I used to have a buyer really close by, but during COVID, he stopped buying lambs, and so I had to start selling them back at the auction. And so that's what I did this whole past year.
Okay.
And lamb prices have always kind of held steady. I mean, there's ups and downs, but we just never lose money with sheep, it seems like. So
yeah, it sounds like your enterprise is all really intertwined together to support each other and kind of make your farm operation complete.
Right. The crops, are another enterprise, and it spreads out the risk, and then also the sheep contribute with fertilizer and another source of income, and like I said before, work to do in the wintertime.
Yeah, fantastic.
And I have a few people that come to the farm to buy sheep directly from me.
Okay.
But mostly they go to auction, and also a lot of people contact me just to buy new lambs for their own sheep operation to start up. I had a guy who bought 100 of them from me this year.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And he's starting up too.
Wonderful.
Need more sheep farmers.
Yes. And then one other question about any advice you have on as you're going into the NRCS to work on the when you started the conversation with your equip grant, any advice that you would give others that are kind of going down that path of how to navigate that process?
Yeah, do a lot of the research yourself, and don't depend on them to give you all the information you need, because I know different FSA offices have their own little specialties, I think. And the one that we have in Hamilton County, I think they, for example, don't really know anything about sheep or organic farming.
Yeah.
There's very few of us in Hamilton County. So or some of these incentive programs for conservation, when I come in there, they're like, oh, you again. But I had to research it on my own and say, hey, there's this, I'm interested in it. And yeah, then they would, help me get the contract going and carry it through. And I guess the other advice I would give is don't try to take on too much. Because you get all excited and you're like, oh, I thinking, this program sounds great. I'm going to sign up for that and get a contract doing this. And then all of a sudden you're like writing letters and asking for extensions, and, there's deadlines, and, things don't always work out
Yeah.
in a timely way. So you get overwhelmed. And so I would say, don't.
Can imagine that. Now, were you able to talk with other producers that were using similar practices and kind of learn from what they were like? Was that part of your research, like talking to others that could give you advice on how they were able to work with their office, or ways that programs they used out of their office?
Yeah, you know, Practical Farmers has a lot of people that have experience with that, and I think uh, I did need to ask a lot of questions from other farmers that were doing like some fencing equip programs, or the CSP program is another
Mm-hmm.
one, and yeah, um, yeah, it's good to have that, that connection with other farmers doing that. I guess.
Yeah, we can learn so much from each other. So
Yeah.
great. Well, good. Well, as we near the end of the time here, is there any last thoughts you have or things you want to share?
Um, I guess I guess I would say yeah, I'm gonna uh, you know starting from scratch was hard, but I think I made the right decision using sheep to begin with, because sheep are, they're easy to work with. It doesn't cost a lot to get started in sheep, and also they always earn their keep.
Mhm.
So I would just say to young farmers out there and other women like me who started from scratch with a new career in midlife, um, start small because it will grow. I mean,
Mhm.
um, there are just so many things you have to change and learn along the way that it's better to grow as you learn. So start small, and the hardest part about doing something is beginning it,
Mhm.
and also use the resources out there, and don't ever be afraid to ask for help.
For sure. That's great advice. Well, I appreciate you sharing all this, and I know for me, being a beginning sheep farmer as well, like there's great advice in starting small and not jumping in too much. So I really appreciate you sharing all of this with us and this beautiful landscape that you have. So everyone viewing, we'd love to hear your feedback. So please, Maggie's going to share in the chat box a link for you to click on to give us your feedback on today's event, and we hope you'll join us for our future Live from the Farm. We do these every Tuesday. But I want to tell you a little bit about Practical Farmers of Iowa. Orchard had mentioned a little bit about us being a farmer-led, membership-based organization that's working to equip farmers to through knowledge sharing and farmer-led research. So I hope you'll go to practicalfarmers.org and check out our website, and see who you can connect with and learn from other farmers. So hopefully you can join us next week when we'll talk with TD Hold'em over in Eastern Iowa about how he's using equipment in his vegetable operation. So until next time, so long. Thank you.
Bye.